Hello everyone and very happy Navratri. Thank you so much for joining our virtual Navratri event, Finding Devi and Her Power Within Us, an introduction to Devi Mahatmyam. My mother and I are delighted that we have with us friends from all over India, and here's a special welcome to those of you who have joined us from outside Chennai. It has been a truly challenging time for all of us, personally and professionally, physically and mentally. The one thing that has kept us going is faith in our families, our friends, and most importantly, in ourselves. The festival of Navratri this year, particularly, is a testament to our collective faith in the power of the Almighty to help us meet challenges and come out victorious. When we decided to do a virtual event this year, I reached out to Pradeep Chakravarti to introduce us to one of the most important treatises on Devi, the Devi Mahatmyam. Our aim was to understand this text and also to find ways to apply it to our lives today when we need this guidance more than ever. Thank you so much, Pradeep, for accepting our invitation. Pradeep describes himself as a behaviorist with a twist to the past. He has more than 2 decades of experience in learning and development across the world. With Devdutt Patnaik, he created a series of self-awareness tours based on Indian philosophy and mythology. Indian, and in particular Tamil Nadu history and culture, is an integral part of Pradeep, and we are delighted he is speaking today. Our sincere thanks also to Srimati Vidya Subramaniam for lending her melodious voice to this presentation. Special blessings to all from my mother, Uma Narayanan, who turned 80 last month. Again, a very happy Navratri to all, and over to you, Pradeep.
Thank you very much, Gayatri. Thank you, Uma Aunty, and congratulations one more, and thank you for your blessings. I'm going to just share my presentation if that's okay. I'm really honored and delighted to do this presentation. I'm familiar with the text to some extent. As a child growing up, my mother was a great devotee of Rajarajeshwari, and she would recite chapter number 5 every day, or definitely on every Friday. But I was little hesitant. In fact, I was very hesitant when Gayatri called me up a couple of weeks back and requested me to do this, because this is completely out of my comfort zone of Vaishnavism and Indian history. But she persisted, and it turned out to be, in a way, a sign from Devi of the key to an answer that has been a personal issue that's been dogging me for the last couple of weeks, which will come to an end tomorrow. And I think this has come in a very serendipitous way. So I'm deeply grateful for Gayatri for not just thinking about me, but to actually persist and make me do this. Like any other Indian text, like anything to do with Sanatana Dharma, this is a text of many, many levels of meaning. And I want to be upfront to tell you that I am no expert. In fact, I don't know whether anybody can be an expert on this, because it's not just about knowing the text, it's also about practicing the text. So I start with a lot of humility and with the bhava of a pupil rather than a teacher. And I would urge you to look at me in that way. If there are any mistakes that I make, I would like you to pardon me for that. My hope is, for those of you who know very little about the text, is to give you an introduction to what the text is. My hope is for people who know the text by heart, or who recite it every day, who live its values every day. My hope is for you to enjoy the visuals, the music, and maybe I have said something that has resonated with you as well. So these are the few sentiments that I have as I speak. My text will be throughout peppered with a lot of visuals, which all come from the internet. Most of these are North Indian or West Indian miniature paintings of the Devi Mahatmyam. I want to start with a verse from the Devi Mahatmyam itself. I think, as Gayatri rightly said, the last 6 months, ever since March, have been very difficult times for us. We have all been afraid many times over. We have all been fearful of even the basic things. And there is one verse in the Devi Mahatmyam that answers straight to this. And in a way, I've juxtaposed two images. One is a 18th century Mysore painting, and the other is a Durga image that has been made for Navaratri this year. And if you notice the Mahishasura, it's slightly different from what you would normally see. And in a way, this is the brilliance of the Devi Mahatmyam. I'm sure the artist who did this sculpture may have known very little about the Devi Mahatmyam, may not even know about it, or may have listened to it, but certainly may not know every stanza of it, may not have read it deeply. But even he has looked at Devi within the hearts of those many doctors and nurses and medical professionals who have worked beyond their call of duty to keep us safe and keep us happy. And in a way, he has seen Devi and the essence of Devi within those human beings. And that is actually the core of the text. So that's why I juxtaposed these two images. And I hope you will enjoy this verse from the Devi Mahatmyam, where the verse is about how Durga is the person who will alleviate all our fears, all our sorrows, and she will decimate any fear that we have in our life, and she will truly protect us.
दुर्गे स्मृता हरसि भीतिमशेषजन्तोः स्वस्थै स्मृता मतिमतीव शुभां ददासि दारिद्र्य दुःख भय हारिणी दारिद्र्य दुःख भय हारिणी दारिद्र्य दुःख भय हारिणी का त्वदन्या सर्वोपकार करणाय सदार्द्रचित्ता सदार्द्रचित्ता सदार्द्रचित्ता
So there are three ways in which we can read any text that is connected with Sanatana Dharma. One is as a shloka, especially this text as a shloka, where you see Devi, whom you have done as an avahana into an image or a murti, or you see a picture of her, and essentially she is outside, she is a goddess, and you're saying the shloka to her and asking for her blessings. That is one way of looking at the Devi Mahatmyam. The second way of looking at Devi Mahatmyam is as a story, because there are basically, the text is composed of three different stories. And you can understand, you can listen to these stories to spend your time usefully, which is really what Katha Kalakshepa used to be in the old days. And you can learn something of value, or you can appreciate it just for the literary value of it. That is the second way of looking at it. The third way, interestingly, is Sumukhi. And Sumukhi in Sanskrit means a mirror, and it is also another name for Devi. If you know your Hayagiri Nandini well, Sumukhi is one of the words that the poet uses there. Sumukhi is a mirror. And when you see the Devi Mahatmyam as a mirror, then you start seeing how Devi is within myself and around me in the inanimate and the animate objects. And the question becomes, how can I find her within myself? Just like I can see myself in a mirror, how can I find her within myself? So a lot of what we will focus on today is really on the story and the Sumukhi perspective. This is a lovely 14th century image of Chamundi from Nepal. And as we look at this, it is also important in this context for me to say that when we learn something in the Sanatana tradition, three words are important: Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. Shravana is to listen to it, which is what we're doing today. I'm listening to myself speak. You are also listening to me. This is just at the very basic level. Manana is to start cogitating and thinking about it. So hopefully, as I'm speaking today, both for me and for all of you, is we will start applying some of what we've learned, and we'll start thinking more deeply about it. The thought could be in terms of, am I practicing this? Do I know this? If I know this, am I doing it? How can I make it apply to my different relationships? So we have to start getting those kind of thoughts. Nididhyasana is at a very, very deep level where you're truly able to look at it purely from the Sumukhi point of view and say, where can I see this within myself? If one aspect of Devi that's inspiring me is her courage, how can I see that courage inspiring me and going within myself? And how can I truly find the courageous Devi within myself? So, of course, needless to say, Shravana is easy, but Manana and Nididhyasana are very, very difficult, which is why we decided to call this an introduction, because that's all we can do in an hour, because it takes probably a lifetime or more for us to truly, truly go within. But for that, we need to listen to first, and that's the journey that we are on today. So let's get some basic information about the text. The text is about 1,500 years old. It was written or composed somewhere in Northeast India. Like for most of our texts, we don't know who did it. And even if we know who did it, our stories of those people are very, very few and far between. And this is totally in contrast with the Western tradition, where we know a lot about the artist or the composer, as much, in fact, as we know about their work. In India, the tradition is very different, because all art is supposed to be in service of reducing our ahankara. So a composer would never put anything more than his or her name to it, because their thought was always, let my work speak for itself. The content is much more important than who said it. Therefore, we know nothing about the person who has created it. We know that this came in Northeast India. There are a total of 700 verses of the text, and which is why it's also called Durga Shaptasati. So, one or two definitions. Durga means one who cannot be fathomed, or one who cannot be conquered, or one who is difficult to understand. And that's why Durg also means a fort, which means it's one that is difficult to capture. So, one that is difficult to hold. Devi comes from the root word Deva, which is light, and which is radiance, actually. Bhagavati comes from an ancient Vedic god who is Bhaga. Bhaga is to give or to share. So you'll find these are the three words that we normally would use today. The entire text is in Sanskrit. Most of it is two-line shlokas. And this is part of the Markandeya Purana, chapters 81 to 93. But it's very, very clearly, it is an interpolation and insertion into the Markandeya Purana. But that means that even by the time that the Markandeya Purana was conceived, this was already a very important text. And therefore, it was seen worthy enough to enter into a Purana. And the image here is again another a very contemporary image of the migrant workers and the artist seeing Devi within them. Again, I go back to the Sumukhi point of where the artist has been able to exactly understand the core principle of the text, which is that Devi is within all of us. What is the overall story? The overall story is of a king called Surata, a merchant called Samadhi, and how they listen to a sage called Sumedas. Now, throughout the text, I won't be doing too much of this, but throughout the text, every mention of a name of a person, of an asura, is very important, and you need to go back to the root work. In fact, good books which have a good commentary will actually give you the word meaning as well, because every asura, every person, the name will have a deeper significance, and that will also help us in our manana phase. So Surata, what does Surata mean? Literally, it means one who drives a chariot well. Dasharatha with 10 directions he could drive the chariot. Surata was Su means beautiful. Surata means one who can drive the chariot beautifully. So the inner meaning of this is, here was a king who was able to, well, the chariot is a metaphor for being on the straight path, for going fast and reaching a destination. So here was a king who was very, very disciplined, who was very focused and very eager and focused on reaching his moksha. A merchant here is a samadhi. A merchant is a vaisya, and a vaisya is all about earning more money. But samadhi is about the deep stage of bliss when there is complete union with the divine. So in a way, it's the opposite of what a merchant might the job of a merchant might be in terms of renouncing it and looking at the merging with the divine. So that's who a merchant is. And the sage is Sumedha. Medha literally means intellect. Here we can also call, like Valmiki called Dasharatha, Dirghadarshi. So what the sage does as Sumedha is, he does not just have the knowledge. So it's not just about the knowledge of the text. It's going beyond from drishti, which is sight, to darshan, which is that sight of many of beyond the time frame, and also looking at the differences and the similarity of oneself and seeing the other person with a lot of critical empathy. So that's really for darshan, the true translation in English, though not the best, will be critical empathy, and that's Sumedhas for you. So Sumedhas is a person who has intellect, not just knowledge, because beyond knowledge, intellect is about sharing the deepest knowledge in a way that is accessible to the other people. And the story, in which is of 3 chapters, is basically Surata and Samadhi listening to Sumedha talking about Devi. We need to understand the historical origins of the Devi Mahatmyam in terms of looking at how Sanatana Dharma has treated man and woman. So traditionally, at least today, many of us read man versus woman, right? Or feminine energy versus male energy. But if you look at many of our deepest rituals that we follow, the answers are very clear that in ancient philosophic traditions, man or masculine energy and woman of the feminine energy were not seen as competing or hierarchical in relationship, but totally complementary. So today we all know about the yin and yang, but here are some simple examples that I put up images of. Some of you may be aware of it, some of you not. So bear with me as I'm taking you through it, even if you know this. You will see on our temple walls or in columns, we use white and we use red, right? Traditional historians believe that the red symbolizes menstrual blood and the white symbolizes semen. And you'll see these color combinations keep coming up again and again because it's about the complementarity of both of these. So today we can argue and say, who's more important for a child to be born? Is it the mother or the father? Actually, if you think back, both of them are equally important. Sure, the mother may bear the child for 9 months, but it's the father who starts the job. And for a child to be healthy and happy, both parents are equally important, and that's where the complementariness comes in. And again, when we look at fire and water, these are our 2 most sacred elements, and all our rituals will have fire and water somewhere. Fire would be the masculine energy of getting things done, which is what a sperm does, right? It moves forward. And water is the feminine energy of nourishment, which is what the egg does, which is holds the sperm and nourishes it into a healthy baby. So when we say fire, it's about fire and water. It's about man and woman and not otherwise. And everywhere in history, if you notice, when the society becomes more and more male dominated, the feminine energy will assert itself subconsciously by seeing feminine goddesses becoming more important. Or like in the case of Tamil Nadu temples, when the priestly class, when the kings became more and more male-oriented, the Devadasi community became more and more powerful in their own way. So you'll always see somewhere there's a balance, and everywhere we see divisions where the feminine energy is reduced and the masculine energy is more important. We'll see new gods being created, like say Adi, like Ardhanarishwara, and or Lakshmi is shown within Vishnu's heart. So you'll see very frequently, as there is an imbalance, somewhere there will be methods to correct that imbalance and bring both these energies together and make them complementary rather than one over another. So in this tradition of complementarity is where we need to see Shakta worship. Shakta is the worship of Devi and seeing Devi or the female goddess as the primal energy in the universe. And this is not something that is new to India. On your left side is this tiny little bronze. It's just about 3 or 4 inches, and you can see it in the Chennai Museum when it opens. This is South India's earliest bronze image, and it is of the mother goddess. It was found in Adichanallur, which is a small village near Arvarthanagari on the banks of the Tambraparni River, way down south in Tamil Nadu. And you can see it is a figure of a mother goddess, and the breasts and the hips are particularly enlarged because women, because of them giving birth, were seen in a way as equivalent to Mother Earth, and they were worshipped because of that. And then later on, we have the Yogini traditions as well. So in the Tantric traditions, the Yogini traditions, and this is the Morena temple in Madhya Pradesh. And it is believed that our Parliament House in Delhi was constructed based on this. And you're all also well aware of the Yogini tradition in Orissa as well. And then we have Shankara, who came in, and Shankara's brilliant masterstroke was in terms of combining the Shanmata, or the different kinds of worship of Shiva, of Vishnu, of Ganapati, of Kaumara, of Surya, and of Devi as well. And he brought these together, and you will find that it is a little after this, say about the 9th, 10th, and the 11th and the 12th century, where we start seeing goddesses independently in shrines in which were meant for Vishnu or for Shiva in most temples, unless otherwise. And this was also a way of bringing the mother goddess tradition, which was there in the folk tradition, right? So in the villages, outside the ritual that was based on the Vedic literature that was patronized largely by Brahmins in Sanskrit, you had the mother goddess worship still counting. So even today in places like Tirunelveli and other places. So you will find these kind of traditions, and this was incorporated into the main tradition. So, and at a very, very recent level, Tirumala Nayaka, when he came to power in Madurai, the tradition of Meenakshi, worshipping Meenakshi, the Meenakshi Kalyanam, this importance that Madurai today has to Meenakshi largely came at that point in time. So you'll find very frequently kings or saints of their times looking at ways to incorporate the mother goddess worship into the mainstream if they have both gone apart in different ways. So it's very likely, therefore, that the Devi Mahatmyam was composed by a person who was truly a saint and a savant in the Shakta traditions. And it is because of the importance of Shakta tradition, it came into contact with mainstream other parts of Hinduism and has therefore been incorporated into the Markandeya Purana. So if you look at the Devi Mahatmyam as a text, to understand it from the Shakta perspective, the primary lesson of the text, or the primary premise of the text, is that the primordial energy in the world, in the universe, as we describe it, as we cannot describe it, is feminine. Yeah, and it is Devi throughout. This is the first fundamental principle. The second is, there has always been a philosophic debate between Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is the one who creates, Prakriti is the one that is created, and it can be interpreted very, very different ways as well. What is with life, what is without life, animate, inanimate, multiple ways to look at it. And the Devi Mahatmyam comes from a premise that is very clear, that whether it is Purusha, whether it is Prakriti, whether it can be defined, whether it cannot be defined, whether it is in earth, whether it is outside, whether it can be perceived by the five senses, whether it cannot be perceived by the five senses, all of it is the feminine energy of Devi. Yeah, and she is within and without, and that is what connects. And which means, like I was saying, those artisans in West Bengal, they have been able to conceive her within the migrant laborer. They've been able to conceive her within the medical staff. They've also been able to conceive her as Durga, who's above all of us, who pervades all of us. And the Trigunas, the Trishaktis, all the different classifications we have in the Sanatana Dharma tradition, Shakta tradition is very clear. It all comes back within Devi, and there is nothing beyond Devi. In fact, the tradition would be to say that it is because our vocabulary is so incomplete, we don't have the competence to understand something. We even give her the name Devi or Durga or Bhagavati, but actually she is even beyond all of these things. So one way to read the text is for men, and in many places you will actually, and remember, this is one man telling the text to two other men. So for them, it's about, let me see the heroine within me. Let me look at the feminine side. Let me look at that nurturing side. Let me look at that science, symbolic water energy within me. But at the same time, not letting go of my courage, of my conviction, and of my courage to do the right thing, even if it means something where I need to wield a stick or a weapon. Yeah, this is for the men. For the women, it's about, let me see the hero within me. Let me see that energy of fire. Let me see the energy of getting stuff done. Let me see the energy of passion, of making things happen and stand up with dignity for the rights that I believe are justifiably mine. So that's for the women. And the entire story is about Devi fighting with multiple asuras. Yeah, we have Madhu, Kaitaba, Mahishasura, Dhumra, Lochana. We have Shumba, Nushumba, and many others, and we'll come to all of them in a minute. All these times, the premise is very clear. If you read it as a story, you can read about the asuras being outside. But if you want to read it from a Sumukhi lens or from a Manana lens, and if you want to move on from this to look at Nididhyasan, it becomes about the Asura quality within ourselves. So, and the text per se doesn't say, but the more we read our sacred text, the more we understand that Asuras and Rakshasas are actually very different. Asuras are people who constantly feel tricked, denied, or cheated. And when they feel tricked, denied, or cheated, they tend to complain. And if you do a little check for ourselves, we love to complain, but seldom do we respect people who complain all the time. That is the quality of an Asura. A Rakshasa is somebody who grabs what is not theirs. And the constant refrain is Asuras and Rakshasas are not bad people in the Western traditional sense of the term. They are good people, because bad and good are both very relative terms. When good people have this tradition, when they start complaining about things without finding a solution, when they grab what is not theirs, in that particular context, we become an Asura or a Rakshasa. But even Asuras and Rakshasas can do a lot of punya, like Ravana, for example, was a great king, did a lot of good things, but because of that quality of being a Rakshasa within him, because he didn't change that quality, even when many people went and told him not to do it, therefore he was killed. But at the end of the day, if you read our text very carefully, whether you're an Asura, whether you're a Rakshasa, eventually you also get moksha. So the text is covered, is split into three broad parts. We have the Prathama Charitra, the first Charitra, which is the super story of Sumedha and meeting Surata and Samadhi. And then there's the story of Mahamaya killing of Madhu and Kaitaba. This shows the tamasic, the passive nature of Devi. The second is Madhyama Charita, which has 3 chapters, which is the whole Mahishasura Mardini story. This is arguably the most famous part of Devi Mahatmyam. Many people, in fact, read just chapter 2 to 4 as a complete piece and go straight to chapter 12, which is the Phalastuti. And there are other different ways in which it can be read. But that seems to be regional and personal preferences. The Uttara Charitra is the last part, where we look at the defeat of Devi, of Shumba and Nishumba, who are 2 asuras. And then, of course, is the Phalastuti at the end. The Narayana Stuti is very beautiful, because most of the slokas there end with Narayani Namaste. It's a very sonoric kind of a verse. And it's the one that drew me to the text initially as a child. And finally, of course, the 13th chapter is the conclusion of what actually happens to Surata and Samadhi after they listen to the to Sumedhas. Okay, so let's look at our Prathama Charitra first. So Surata was a descendant of Agni, and he was a very a king of great lineage. And he was actually one of the Manus, or the Manus are one of the most important kings, the lineage of kings. Surata had a tough life, poor chap. He was ruling a place called Kola, and he was attacked by enemies. And he fought very bravely, he fought very hard, but unfortunately the enemies defeated him, and they took a large chunk of his territory away. And feeling very despondent, very dejected, he came back, but at least he was happy that he still had his little part of the kingdom, and he had his capital city around. But even that turned out to be a very short-lived joy, because very soon what happened was there was a civil war internally. His treasurer and some of his important ministers, they plotted against him, and very soon he was ousted from power, and he was exiled to the forest, and he lived in the forest. And he was, even when he was living in the forest, because he was so attached to his kingdom, all the time he was thinking about what happened in his kingdom, right down to even how were his elephants being treated, the ones that he had looked after so well. And that was all he was thinking about, and he was still very attached and very much bemoaning the sad turn of events for him. And at some point in time, he met a merchant called Samadhi. Samadhi was a merchant who was very, very prosperous. He had many wives and many sons. All of them were very, very good people. But some sad turn of events, the wives and the sons had plotted against Samadhi. And even though they had a lot of wealth, they plotted against him and they exiled him and they removed him from their family. And he also came to be in the forest. And he was also deeply distressed that this family, and in spite of the fact that they had done some really mean things to him, he was very, very deeply distressed that the family had forsaken him. And he was very, very attached to them. And he was caused a lot of pain because of this attachment. So both Surata and Samadhi meet Medas and Sumedha, and some texts say Meda, some people say Sumedha. So they meet the sage, and both of them talk about how much of pain they are going through because they have attachment. And even when they know that attachment is not a good thing to have, we must be detached in the world, but they still feel attachment, and because of that attachment, they're going through a lot of pain. And then Sumedha, and in fact, Surata actually calls Sumedha as Bhagavan, which means Bhagavan is a person who will give. Bhaga is to give without expecting anything else in return. And that's very difficult it's impossible for any living thing, because any act we do, we always expect something out of it. So we have Surata calling Sumedha as Bhagavan, and then Bhagavan, Sumedha says, well, you know, attachment is a painful process. And you know that attachment is a painful process, and yet you feel this way because all of this is just a leela or a sport or a game, that the true reality is speaking, who is Mahamaya. And Mahamaya is the one who has created you, has created the thing that you are attached to, and has also created attachment itself. All of this is about Mahamaya. And unless you are able to grasp and understand Mahamaya completely, you can only realize that she is the true reality. You will continue to have this attachment. You will know that attachment is not good and it will only give you sorrow. And yet you will feel attached, and yet you will feel sorrow, and so on. So then Surata asks him 6 questions. He says, who is this Mahamaya? What is the purpose of her manifestation? What are her actions? What is her innate nature? What is her form? And what is her origin? And the rest of the text is really an answer to these questions. So the first story that we hear is of Vishnu reclining in the Adisesha at the end of a kalpa. And we typically have a lot of snake images in our mythology, because snakes shed their skin. And in shedding their skin, they give us a very important clue of how we look at time. Today we follow the Gregorian calendar. So today we have a Gregorian calendar where time does not come back. So like, for example, 2020 will not come back. And I guess many of us don't want 2020 to come back. But the Indian conception of time is very different. Every 60 years, our years repeat. And in a way, that was symbolic of the snake shedding its skin and creating a new skin, which is why you'll find the snake very often. And in the year wax of Vishnu, Mahavishnu, 2 demons are born, 2 asuras are born. One is called Madhu, the other is called Kaitaba. And the year wax is symbolic of hidden essential nature, things that we know that is deep within us. And both these asuras are born. Madhu means temporal bliss, which is literally translated into liquor. Kaitaba means a multitude of small worms. I'm guessing it's something quite gross, but so it must be something to do with death and decay. Both of these people, both of these asuras come to kill Brahma. And at that point in time, Vishnu is reclining, he's enjoying his time, his meditation. Mahamaya comes out of Vishnu and she goes to Brahma, and she convinces Brahma to tell Vishnu to kill Madhu and Kaitaba. Mahamaya here is a quality of tamasic, which is not indolence, but it's about inaction. And I guess why this story comes first and why Mahamaya comes first is if we need to truly make Devi Mahatmyam work for us, we need to take that first step of getting out of inaction and actually acting. And I guess maybe me doing this conversation here and you listening and us setting this time up for doing this is probably us moving away from the tamasic action and actually getting into how we can make this text work for us and find Devi within us. So sure enough, the celestials then go to Mahamaya. They tell Mahamaya to tell Brahma to kill these two asuras. And there's a very beautiful shloka there where they say, Devi, you are Swaha, or you're the offerings to all the devas. You are Swada, who are the offerings to all the pitrus, and you are the essence of Om. And here Om is split into the stages of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. And because of many similar shlokas of entities of the celestials, Devi agrees. And finally, different deities give different weapons to Devi. Here's a small list, and they're all symbolic. So each of these weapons have a deeper meaning. I'm just going to give you the laundry list, but there's a lot of other details as well, which you should read much later on. She has a sword, which signifies beauty. She has a spear, which signifies sovereignty. She has a human skull, which signifies bashfulness, because our ego and all of this is actually in our head. She has a mace, which signifies intelligence. She has a chakra, which symbolizes wisdom, a conch for modesty, a bow for nourishment, arrows for contentment, a sling for peace, and an iron club for forbearance. So she comes out, and while in her presence, imbued with her energy, Vishnu actually takes Madhu and Kaitaba on his thighs, and he cracks their skulls open, and he cuts their necks away from them, and therefore kills them. And very frequently you will find the preferred method of killing asuras in the Devi Mahatmyam is by chopping the neck off and decapitating the asura, because the head is seen as a symbol of our pride, our ego, and our ahankara. And in removing the head, then we tend to lose our ego, and we become much more open to understanding that Shakti is within us and Shakti is outside as well. And she is truly the great person, and it's not us. And with this, we come to an end of the Prathama Charita. And this is a lovely image of Madhu and Kaitaba. So you can see them on the right extreme. These are the flames over here, and this is Vishnu reclining. This is in a Pallava temple called Tirmayam, which is not very far off from Madurai. It's a very grand scene, but you won't find Devi or Mahamaya over here, because this is an image that was probably made just about the time when Devi Mahatmyam was created. And it is very likely that at that point of time, the text may not have actually been known in the south. It might have been something that was exclusively known only in the northeastern regions of India. But I just wanted to show you this image. I'm going to play the song now, and let's see if this works.
त्वयैतद्धार्यते विश्वम् त्वयैतत्सृज्यते जगत् त्वयैतत्पाल्यते देवी त्वयैतत्पाल्यते त्वयैतत्पाल्यते देवी त्वमत्स्यन्ते च सर्वदा सर्वदा विसृष्टौ सृष्टिरूपा त्वं स्थितिरूपा च पालने तथा संहृतिरूपान्ते जगतोऽस्य जगन्मये जगतोऽस्य जगन्मये जगतोऽस्य जगन्मये
So now we come to the Madhyama Charitra. The Madhyama Charitra is the vanquishment of Mahishasura. and arguably it's the most famous part of the Devi Mahatmyam. Like I said, many devotees read just the Madhyama Charitra. Let's look at the story of Mahisha. For about 100 years, Mahishasura and Indra fought a battle. Indra, in a way, is a metaphor for somebody who is constantly filled with all the things that anybody might possibly need, but is perennially insecure that they will lose them. And Indra, by the way, is not a person, it is actually a post. So anybody can actually conquer Indra and become the new Indra. So the current incumbent of the post is always insecure about his position. Mahisha and Indra have a very bitter fight for about 100 years. And finally, Mahisha wins and Indra loses. And Mahisha becomes a new Indra. And when he becomes a new Indra, the Celestials are very upset about it. There are a couple of shlokas on all the horrible things that he does to the Celestials. And the ultimate curse seems to be that he punishes the Celestials by getting them to be mortals to run around in the world. And they're obviously not very happy about this at all. Who would be if they have to leave Devaloka and come down to the earth? So they all go to Shiva and Vishnu. And as they recount the indignities that Mahisha has passed on to them or has treated them, Shiva and Vishnu get more and more angry. And out of that deep anger, there emerges an effulgence from them, which becomes the form of a woman. And when this becomes a form of a woman, every important god gives something that is vital to them into that woman's body. And we have a long list we have many shlokas here. And in a way, so you see in the first one, we have now looked at how Devi is behind Vishnu conquering Madhu and Kaitaba. Madhu and Kaitaba were asuras, and it was very important, a very important story in those days. So what the composer has done in his effort to show Devi as number one, he has first taken Vishnu, looked at a very important conquest that Vishnu makes, and is actually telling everybody, hey, Vishnu didn't do it himself. It was actually Mahamaya or Devi who made him do it. So it's all about how do you promote and make Devi the number one primordial energy in the Shanmata that we have. So here we have every god giving something of them into Devi, which means more as a right. Devi becomes somebody who's that greatness of all the great qualities of all the important gods. So what do they give? The face is formed from Shiva. The tresses are formed by Yama. The arms are formed by Vishnu because Vishnu is the preserver, the protector, and therefore the arms are important. So Vishnu's most important body part comes to Devi. The breasts are formed by the moon. The torso is formed by Indra. Varuna gives the legs and the thighs. The earth forms the hips. And remember, the hip is also the place where the woman gives birth. And the ultimate fertility symbol is the earth. And therefore, the earth becomes Devi's hips. Her feet become Brahma. So the creator actually becomes the feet. So again, he's showing how Devi is the most important out of all the Trimurtis. The sun rays become the toes. And if you actually look, in a way, what he's saying is that every step that Devi makes, she brings, the quality of Devi is radiance, right? So every step that she takes, she fills that place with sunlight and the radiance and the warmth and the light of the sun. And then we have the Vasus, who are the ancient goddesses of wealth. They were in the fingers. So remember that in Indian tradition, wealth was always in the fingers because the more you give away the wealth, the more you tend to accrue. And then the nose was of Kubera because the ultimate wealth is in the nose, which is prana. And if we don't have that life breath, then there's no point of having any wealth. And that goes to Kubera, who is the god of wealth anyway. Prajapati gives the teeth. The fire is of the three eyes that Devi has, and the three eyes here, fire is always seen in three because it's the sun, the moon, and the fire. Sandhya, the goddess of evening, makes her eyebrows. Vayu gives her the ears. The weapons are also now listed. Shiva gives her a Trishula. Vishnu gives her his chakra. Varuna gives her a conch. Agni gives her a lance. Vayu gives her a bow and arrows. Indra gives her a bell and a bolt. Yama gives her a cudgel. Varuna gives her a noose. Brahma gives her a water vessel. Now, the water vessel is important because as a creator, Brahma always has it. Any deal in those days would be witnessed by a witness. And the witness will seal the deal by pouring water from a kamandala between the two parties who will wash their hands together. Basically, symbolically, it means that whatever conditions change, because water always changes shape, regardless of way the water changes condition, our deal will be solid. And which is why you'll find Brahma will always have the kamandala. And if you look carefully, if it's a good sculptor, which they were in the old days, Brahma's kamandala will always be inverted because his job as a creator is never going to be over. So Brahma gives her a kamandala, and then we have Surya gives her his radiance. Kala, the god of time, gives her a sword and a shield. The Shirabdi, or the Milky Ocean, gives her a lotus garland and the most beautiful garment to wear, and many, many jewels. Vishwakarma is the divine architect. He gives her an axe and a coat of chainmail. The oceans give her a beautiful lotus or a Mahapadma, and Himavan gives her a lion, and Kubera gives her a wine cup. So she has all of these in her many, many arms. And when she receives this, the shloka says, she lets out her laughter. And in that laughter, the shloka itself is beautiful. In that laughter, the world trembled, the sky trembled, and the gods themselves trembled. Because in a way, because she had the best parts of all the gods, she had the best weapons of all the gods, she had at that instant become more than all the gods put together. And when she has this effulgent form, she is confronted by Mahisha's commanders. So always the Asura never fights the battle first. He always sends other people. So in a way, the composer is also telling us that before we need to find self-awareness, we'll have a lot of resistances. We'll constantly blame other people. And unless we get rid of all those different, let's say, even in a way, our different curtains of ignorance or our different veils of ignorance, we cannot see ourselves truly. So you'll find this metaphorically said. So who are the commanders that Mahisha sends? He sends somebody called Chikasura, Chamara, Mahahanu, Asiloma, Bashkala, Parivrata, and Bidala. And all of these, if you know your Sanskrit well, and if you look at what those words mean, it means impulsiveness, harmfulness, or thinking about harming somebody, craving for something, bondage to something, faulty vision, not being able to see properly. So each of these asuras have one of these names, and all of these therefore become metaphors for obstructions that we have within ourselves to find Devi within ourselves. And each of these weapons also have a meaning. I'm not getting into that. But when the battle starts, the composer says, it is like a forest on fire, and her speed is so quickly. And even with her breath, many of the warriors are killed. Their heads are smashed. Their necks are cut. The blood flows as a river on the battleground. And as the blood flows, it mingles with the vomit that they're giving out. There are many of her warriors who are all doing very scary war dances, and there is a river of blood. At least 10 shlokas over here, they talk about in great gory vividity of the kind of battle that happens, and how in many places they fight with each other, they wrestle with each other, arrows and lances are hurled at each other. And interestingly, unlike in the Ramayana, where there are times when Ravana causes Rama a lot of physical pain, and his arrows actually take off pieces of his flesh. Throughout the text, I look fairly carefully. There is not one place where Devi is wounded. So she's truly a warrior queen. She's truly a warrior goddess. And every blow with Mahisha's cudgel, or a lance that he hurls, or an arrow that he discharges, all of these are broken asunder by her arrow or by her lance, and she continues to be victorious. And in chapter 3 is where Mahishasura Vadana actually happens. And what happens here is he first tries to hit her with a sword, and she breaks the sword. Then she throws a lance at her, and that lance also she breaks to many pieces. And finally, she says, from the depth of her stomach, she says hum, which is the Bija mantra for Devi. And just by listening to the hum, and hum incidentally also means I. In a way, it's metaphorically saying, if we need to see us killing that Mahishasura within us, we need to first recognize our ego, and our I is important, and it prevents us from seeing that Devi within us. And because she says that I as a Bija mantra, finally Mahisha, he becomes weaker at least. Mahisha, by the way, means somebody who delights in gross pleasures, right? So which is why he has a buffalo as well. And he does 8 things that disturb her a lot. So these 8 things are important. I've listed them down. And the 8 things that he does in the battle are he irritates her from the back, he throws things at her, he tries to trip her, these kind of things. But the 8th number is very important. So throughout the text, these numbers are very important. Just like I said, the names of the asuras are very important. What are these 8 hindrances? Smarana is the thoughts of pleasure that we have. Kirtana is the chattering about them within our minds. Keli is indulgence in pleasures. Prekshana is addiction to pleasures. Guhya Bhasara is the secret conversations we have with us or to others to get more of the pleasures that we want. Sankalpa is the resolve to some purpose. Adhyavasya is the volition to acquire what will give us true happiness. And Kriya Nispati is the attainment of objective pleasure. So these are the 8 distractions that we have and the eventual passage that we need to go for finding Devi within ourselves. And these are represented by the 8 distractions that Mahisha indulges in his fight with Devi. And finally, she drinks 1 glass of madhu. I know there are I don't know. I mean, personally, I feel that there are some commentators and translators who say, no, it's madhu in a very symbolic sense. But I mean, she's a warrior goddess. Yeah, there's nothing fair in love and war. So she's really in that mood. She drinks that madhu, and you can always in the shloka, you can almost see her, smacking her lips, throwing her cup away, and then what she does is she takes one of her legs, and she places it on the neck of Mahisha, and she presses on the neck. And she takes her other lance and she thrusts it on his chest so that his lower part of the body doesn't move. And as she continues to exert force through her leg on his neck, the neck breaks, and from the buffalo's head, the true head, the male head of Mahisha comes out. And when it comes out, then she severs her head away. And in doing that, she severs the true ego, which is masked within the outside head that we have. So the breaking of the buffalo head and the human head coming out, and how she chooses the head and not the chest, they're all deeper meanings of how, just as our ability to think about Devi comes from the brain and from the mind, our ability to be away from her, to not see her, also comes from the same part. And therefore, when we need to truly see Devi, we need to be able to remove that ego and those parts of the brain that are being curtains for us to not see her from within. And then chapter 4, which is the end of the Madhyama Charitra, ends with a praise of Devi. This is here an image from the Pallava period of Mahishasura Mardini. You can see Mahisha is now in a slanting posture. So the sculptor is telling you that if you just watch the scene for a little longer, he's actually collapse and fall. And I love this image because it shows Devi in all her victorious mood and just showing that she's totally in command of the battlefield. And you'll notice that the actual center point of the image is her hand on the bow. And this is also in a way the sculptor is telling us symbolically that we have to be like Surata. Unless we hold the bow very straight, unless we hold it tightly, our arrow is not going to go through. And if our arrow doesn't go through, it is metaphorical of us not being able to see Devi. This is another image from the Chalukya period, from Patadakkal. So you'll see the Chalukyas and the Pallavas were, by the way, they were bitter enemies. They were fighting each other, but they drew a lot of inspiration from each other in the way they showed Devi and the way they showed their sculptures as well. So you'll see much smaller. There's a much smaller image in Patadakkal in Karnataka. I hope that all of you were able to listen to the song the last time. Gayatri, if you can't, I've kept my phone with me, so you can just give me a call or send me a text message if the audio doesn't work, but I hope it does. So this is from the Madhyama Charitra, when the beauty of Devi is mentioned as she is going out in battle. And over here, you see another Pallava image from the Kailasnatha temple. And I want you to particularly notice the brilliant way in which the sculptor has not only shown her pose in a very, very confident way, but also see the attention to detail to the elephant. So let's listen to Vidya singing one verse.
Hey वारादिभिरप्यपारा सर्वाश्रयाखिलमिदं जगदंशभूतमव्याकृता हि परमा हि कृता परमा प्रकृतिस्त्वमाद्या
I believe all of you can hear the music now, so I'm feeling very incomplete if we don't listen to the first song. So I'm just going to go back, please. I crave your indulgence in letting me do this. Vidya has been so supportive. She did this so quickly and so sincerely. I really have to thank her for this, and I must ensure that all of you have listened to her music. So just to go back, this is, I think this is interestingly enough from the Madhyama Charitra. So we are at the right place. This is about Devi being seen as the one person who can rescue us from the anger and fear that we constantly experience.
दुर्गे स्मृता हरसि भीतिमशेषजन्तोः स्वस्थै स्मृता मतिमतीव शुभां ददासि दारिद्र्य दुःख भय हारिणी दारिद्र्य दुःख भय हारिणी दारिद्र्य दुःख भय हारिणी का त्वदन्या सर्वोपकार करणाय सदार्द्रचित्ता सदार्द्रचित्ता सदार्द्रचित्ता
So moving from the Madhyama Charitra, we come to the Uttara Charitra, which is the last part of the Devi Mahatmya. And this is the story of Devi decimating Shumba and Nuchumba. Shumba, literally translated in Sanskrit, means I am. So that is Ankara. Nishumba, literally translated, means mama, mine, which is mama. Right? So in both of these, when we look at the defeat, the decimation of Shumba and Nishumba, what the composer is saying is that unless we remove the I am and mine away from us, we will not be able to perceive Devi. And the image here is very important. I'll come back to it in a minute. So Shumba is the celestials go and pray to Durga. Durga, as I said, is one who is difficult to understand, difficult to know. And in that chapter 5 is very interesting because, like I said, all the slokas, or most of them, end with Namostasya, Namostasya, which is a very beautiful sloka. And they go and complain to Devi that Shumba and Nishumba are creating a lot of trouble for everybody. And Shumba is actually very angry that Devi is competing with him, and she is entertaining thoughts of coming to have a battle with him. So he first sends a messenger. The messenger is called Sugriva. Now, don't get confused with Sugriva of the Ramayana. Sugriva just means Su is beautiful, Griva is neck. So it just means somebody who had a beautiful neck. So Sugriva comes to Devi and he says, look, you don't waste your time trying to kill Shumba. You're not going to be able to do it. He is way, way more powerful than you. And I think you should just, call it a day. and respect his authority and be one of his loyal subjects. So Devi says, basically, get lost. Yeah. She says, look, I have to keep my vow that when anybody asks me for their protection, I will do everything I can to protect them. And if he really thinks that he is one up over me, let him come and let him win my hand. We'll see what happens. So she's very, very confidently, almost cockily, she gives this threat. And of course, Sugriva goes back. And there's a good chance that he might have told Shumba a little bit more and added a little salt into what Devi actually said. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But essentially, Shumba gets very, very angry. And he says, it's beneath my status for me to go and fight with her first. Let me send some of my most trusted asuras. And you will see again here, all the asuras that he sends, they all have different names, and all those names have a deeper meaning that will help us look at what are the impediments that we have within recognizing Devi within ourselves. The first one is Dhumra Lochana. And actually, Shumba says to Dhumra Lochana, he says, go humiliate her by grabbing her by her tresses, drag her and bring her to me. That's how he actually says it. So Dhumra Lochana goes with 60,000 demons. And the commentators say the 60,000 is not a random number, because there are 6 changes in human nature, in human beings, from birth till death and decay. And he says each of these 10,000 are one stage, and therefore there's an important number. So he goes to fight. Devi only says hum, and she says it with such energy, with such power, with such courage and conviction. He dies, and the rest of his army of 60,000 demons are all decimated, are all killed by her lion. And then the next, Chanda and Munda go. This is from chapter 7 of the Devi Mahatmyam. When Chanda and Munda go, Devi transforms into Kali. Kali, in a way, is the one who devours, or the one who has conquered time itself, which means the one who is timeless, the one who is beyond the conception of time. And she wears a garland of 50 skulls. And these 50 skulls are representative of the 50 alphabets of the Sanskrit language. So in a way, the composer is saying the language as we know it is also actually Devi herself. And because she kills Chanda and Munda, she becomes Chamundi. And then he sends this terrible looking asura called Rakta Bija. Rakta is blood and Bija is a seed. And that's the image that you can see here. He is not only colored, that of the color of a blood, but every time an arrow hits him and a drop of blood falls on the battleground, a new asura comes up. So every time Devi is fighting with him, and she attacks him with arrows, she attacks him with her sword, she attacks him with many, many other weapons. And every time a drop of blood falls on the battleground, a new asura comes up, and sometimes many asuras comes up. And Devi feels that it's not something that she can handle on her own. So she calls her Saptamatrikas. The Saptamatrikas are 7 manifestations of Devi, where she is half, the body is of Devi, the head is of a male god. So we have Maheshwari, who's composed of Shiva and Devi, Vaishnavi, who's composed of Vishnu and Devi, Brahmi, who's composed of Brahma and Devi, Indrani, who's composed of Indra and Devi, Varahi, who's composed of Varaha, and Varaha is Vishnu's avatar Varaha, and Devi. Then we have Kaumari, which is Muruga or Kartikeya and Devi. And then now in the North Indian traditions, and the text we have Narasimhi, which is Narasimha and Devi. But in South India images, we don't find Narasimha, we find Chamundi instead. So for some reason, we don't have Narasimha here in the iconography. But the Saptamatrikas are very important deities in the old days. In fact, these 7 goddesses were built together, were installed together, and all common property in the village was belonged to them. And you'd find these images of the Saptamatrikas next to an important village water body. That was the most important common property. And there are only 3 independent temples for Saptamatrikas in Tamil Nadu. One happens to be in our good old Velachery, which is as old as this text itself. So it's easy, at least 1,500 years old. So Chamunda comes up, and you can see her on the left bottom. Chamunda comes, and every drop of Rakta Bija, that before it falls on the ground, Chamundi swallows it up. And because of that, Rakta Bija is not able to procreate, is not able to create more of himself, and eventually Devi kills him as well. And then in chapter 9, Nishumba comes to battle, and Nishumba's kill. Now I think we have some time, so I'm going to very quickly look at just some representations of what the battle looked like. Yeah. So, so remember now, Devi is fighting, and all the Saptamatrikas or the 7 goddesses are fighting with her. She leaves out a volley of her arrows, and they break the arrows of Nishumbha and injure all the asuras on the other side of their body, and they all and she lets go a steady stream of weapons. And then what Nishumbha does is he's armed with a glittering shield and a sharp-edged sword, and he landed a blow on the head of the lion, which is the mount of the mother. But the Devi, with her arrow-like weapon, she soon cut the sword of Nishumbha and the shield of Nishumbha, and which is marked with the images of the 8 moons. And then when his sword and shield were cut, he threw his lance, which was also cut asunder by Devi using her chakra. Then Nishumbha was furious with rage. He seizes a spear, and that too was powdered by the mother with her fist. And then as he approaches her, he then whirls his mace, and he hurls it towards Devi, and the mace too was split and rendered into dust by her Trishula. And all of this happens. So ultimately, Nishumbha exhausts all his weapons, and he's furious with rage. So he jumps off his Vahana, and he comes to actually fight with Devi with his bare hands. And Devi also lets go of her weapons. She fights with Nishumbha, and they both wrestle with each other. And they're wrestling on the ground, they're wrestling on the skies, and then finally they come back. And Shumba is killed in chapter 10, and he's the one who wrestles. Nishumbha is also killed by that time, and when Nishumbha and Shumba are killed, then the heavens pour forth with flowers. The Gandharvas come and they start singing music. All the celestial come, they all hail Devi, and eventually all the Saptamatrikas merge within Devi, and the true form of Devi is revealed to the entire celestials, and she stands victorious in the battleground. And at the end, we have in the Uttara Charitra, we have the chapter 11 is the Narayani Namostate. It's that verse, those verses which are very beautiful. Chapter 12 is the Palastuti, which says, what will you get if you listen to this story? So you will not get harm, misfortunes will not come to you, enemies will not affect you, you will get all the wealth that you need, especially when you say it during Sharad Navratri, which is during this time. And if you recite it during the 8th, 10th, and 8th, 14th, and 9th days of any fortnight, and in the Palastuti, in many times, Devi herself speaks, and she says, I will protect the listener and the family, and I will give you tranquility, I will give good health, and I will also give the quality of fearlessness to anybody who listens or says this charitra of mine. And this shlok, this song that Vidya has beautifully sung is actually not from the Devi Mahatmyam. It comes with an appended text, but I thought the sentiment was very beautiful and it was correct in the Palastuti. So I'm going to play that. But in the end, if you also remember your story well, this is actually a story within a story. Eventually what happens is, after listening to Sumedha, Surata and Samadhi install a small image of Devi, and they start worshipping her with great devotion, and eventually Devi reveals to herself to them. Surata gets back his kingdom, and he goes on to be a great king and becomes one of the Manus, which is the ultimate greatness for honor for a king. Samadhi finds out a way to resolve this difficulty that he has. He recognizes what true knowledge is, and he makes a choice of staying the way he is and in the forest. So in a way, one person goes back to what he wanted. The other person says, yeah, I don't want to go back. I'm happy where I am. So in a way, I think the composer is saying that both of these can be options. It's not that you need to only get what you originally started with. Because of listening to Devi Mahatmya, you might even realize that what you wanted in the beginning is not what you want at the end, and that's okay. So let's listen to the Palastuti.
देव्याध्यानं तवाख्यातं गुह्यतरं महत् तस्मात् सर्वप्रयत्नेन सर्वं कामफलप्रदं सर्वं कामफलप्रदम् सर्वप्रयत्नेन सर्वं कामफलप्रदम् एतस्यास्त्वं प्रसादेन सर्वमान्यो भविष्यसि सर्वरूपमयी देवी सर्वं देवीमयं सर्वं देवीमयं सर्वं देवीमयं जगत् अतोऽहं विश्वरूपां तां नमामि परमेश्वरी तां नमामि परमेश्वरी तां नमामि परमेश्वरी
That is an image of Ashtabhuja Durga, which is actually a Chalukya image from Karnataka. It was brought back by Rajendra Chola as a war booty, and it is now installed in a temple in Gangekonda Cholapuram. I wanted to really thank Gayatri and Uma Aunty for giving me this opportunity, especially Gayatri for pushing me to do this, and I'm glad she did what she did. Thank you, Gayatri, for that. Vidya Subramaniam is a wonderful music teacher. She has a website. She teaches many, many students, an extremely accomplished chartered accountant who's also passionate about music, and she's won a state awardee as well. She's very, very obliging in doing this for me. This is an image of the Saptamatrikas in either in Tirukkuram or in Tirukkolakudi. And I'm deeply grateful for all of you to listening to me. Like I said, this is only an introduction. I'm not an expert on this, as many of you may be, in terms of the text and the deeper meaning of the text. All I've done is that with a lot of humility, I've presented an introduction to the text. I hope I have not made any errors, and if there are, I hope you will forgive me for the same. I wanted to end with another chant of Devi that I am very fond of, that really made me recognize her power. And I'm sure most of you will know this. It is attributed to Adi Shankara. I'm just going to recite the first stanza. If you know it, please join along, because I'm going to chant it very, very slowly. Aigiri Nandini Nandita Medhini Vishwa Vinodhini Nandanute Girivara Vindhya Shirodhini Vasini Vishnu Vilasini Jishnunute Bhagavati Heshiti Kanta Kutumbhini Bhuri Kutumbhini Bhuri Krite Jaya Jaya He Mahishasuramardhini Ramyakapardhini Shailasute Jaya Jaya He Mahishasuramardhini Ramyakapardhini Shailasute Jaya Jaya He Mahishasuramardhini Ramyakapardhini Shailasute. Om. Thank you.